So one thing that I want to show that I think will really help you to understand how these streams work and how this decorator pattern works in Java is how to actually implement this yourself. And we can do this really simply. And I think by seeing this, it really helped many persons when they have done this the first time to be able to understand how these streams are actually working and why am I passing in something into the constructor. Why can't I just read from this file and not have to do this file writer and print writer and remember all these different types of streams? Why can't I just read from this file? And the answer to that is because we need to be able to combine different attributes. And it's really hard to see between this file writer and this print writer what the attributes are. Or the same thing on the reading side between this file reader and the buffered reader. But if we were to create our own writer or reader and we made it so that it capitalized everything that it was going to read, for instance, then I think that makes it a little bit more clear here. So what we are going to do here is we are going to create our own file reader, or we are going to create our own reader that is going to take a reader and is going to capitalize everything that it reads. And we are going to plug this right into the chain just like we had wrapped our file reader and a buffered reader. We are going to wrap that buffered reader inside of our capitalization reader. So let's go ahead and declare this out and see how we want this to look, and then we'll implement this. So I'm going to create a capitalization reader and we'll call this cap reader. And we haven't created this class yet, it doesn't exist. So we are going to implement this class in a minute here, and we are going to make it so that this cap reader will basically wrap this buffered reader. In fact, it will work with any type of reader. So we are going to pass in bReader here, and then instead of getting our lines from bReader, we are going to get it from cap reader. And then instead of trying to close our check-in for bReader, we are going to check cap reader. And then we are going to close our cap reader. So now let's go ahead and create this class. So I'm going to do create class here. And inside create class here, I'm going to make the superclass of this reader. And I can click browse here to see that I want to use this reader, this Java IO reader, and then I will click finish. And you can see it is automatically tried to implement some of these methods for me or override these methods. We're extending reader here. Now we could do this at a very basic level, but we would have to implement this read method that takes in a character array as a buffer and then an offset and then a link. And that's a little bit more complicated than I want to get into here. So let's change this. Instead of extending reader, let's go ahead and just extend buffered reader because it extends reader, so that should work. So we'll go ahead and add this constructor that is required here. So we are going to take in a reader in our constructor, and then we are just going to pass it to our parent class. Our buffered reader, that is our parent, will pass in whatever reader we get. But we are not doing anything special here. So let's go ahead and use this refactoring here. We are going to right click on capitalization reader. We are going to click source and we are going to choose override implement methods. And this is just a shortcut in Eclipse to be able to override methods very easily and see what you could override. So we are going to override some methods on buffered reader. We could have overridden some on reader, you can see here, but we wanted to override this read line because this is the one that we really care about here. So for read line here, instead of just returning whatever is read from our parent class, we are going to store that in a variable. So let's go ahead and do this. Let's create a string, call it line, and we are going to call super.readLine, which is going to call readLine on our parent, which is our buffered reader. And then we are going to check to see if we got something. if line does not equal null, then we are just going to return our line to uppercase. Otherwise, we are just going to return null. So if we got null from the parent reader, then we will just return null. But if we got something, we are going to uppercase it and we are going to return that. And so what this is going to do is, it's going to use our parent. It is going to use buffered reader internally to do all the reading. So we don't have to re-implement all this reading logic. We are just adding something to the chain. So we are basically inserting ourselves into this pipeline and saying, okay, once we read the data, we are going to manipulate this data and then pass it back. And we are going to use the buffered reader here that we are extending to read this line. So let's look at this in the code that is using it, and it will make a little bit more sense here. So now our code that is using it, we had to create our capitalization reader. In our capitalization reader, we created a new one here and we passed in our buffered reader, which had passed in our reader. So we have wrapped this 3 layers deep. We have our file reader that is able to read from a file. We have added this buffering layer over it that allows us to buffer the text from this file so we can read it in a stream instead of reading it 1 byte at a time. We are able to read the entire line, and then we have wrapped that in this ability to capitalize everything that comes out of the stream. So in these are plug-and play compatible. We could mix these up. We could create a lowercase reader and we could insert them at different layers, or we could use a compression reader that is able to read something that is compressed. So we could mix and match these together. This is kind of the idea here, is that we can keep on chaining them and none of these need to know what the other ones are doing. It is going to apply these operations in this specific order because remember, our capitalization reader, it is relying on a buffered reader. So it is going to call the buffered reader in order to read, and then that buffered reader is going to call the file reader in order to read. So then we are going to end up reading from this file, and every time we are calling read line here, if we look at our capitalization reader, how's this implemented? Well, we are overriding this read line, and instead of just reading the line, it is going to go ahead and read the line, but if the line is not null, it's going to uppercase the line and then return that result. So let's go into our hello world and let's go ahead and run this and see what happens here. As you can see, there is no output to the console. But if we go into our D directory here, you can see our output page now has everything capitalized. And if you remember, our input or test.txt does not. So we can see that by applying this reader, we are able to make it so that everything got capitalized. So you can think about a lot of different ways you could utilize this. You could create a reverse reader that is able to read things in reverse. Some kind of proprietary compression or encryption that you are doing. All kinds of ways that you would be able to extend this. And if you think about, let's say you wanted to write an encryption reader that was able to encrypt using some kind of encryption algorithm. If you didn't have this capability in Java, as hard as it is to have to do this kind of syntax where you wrap things together, if you didn't have that ability, if you wanted to write an encryption reader, you would have to implement low-level I/O yourself. You would have to re-implement all of this. Whereas now all you would have to do is just like we did with this capitalization reader and do your encryption here or your decryption, and you would create a reader in a writer, and then you would have all that functionality just implementing 1 or 2 methods.